can go. Murphy's Law, we can go. Nuclear assault, we can go. Orgasm, we can go. Metallica. We can go. Motorhead, we can go.
What's going on, everybody? Fadi here, and I'm going to do a new series, man. So this is going to be the first video in a new series I'm doing. I've been reading a lot and going back and looking up bands, like from around the world that were, early metal bands and things. And I'm really getting into the history of metal. Some I know, and then some I have no idea about. But it's great to go back and read about metal, that existed, but for some reason I never got into it. And one of the reasons would be like regional. So maybe you had a great metal band in another country, but their music wasn't released in the U.S. or you got U.S. bands that weren't released, overseas, U.K., Japan, whatever. So what I've really been thinking about lately is how metal developed, the history of it, and I'm looking mostly at like the mid '80s on. That's kind of like my heyday there. So one of the great things about metals is these different scenes developed, around the globe. You had punk and you had thrash and you had death and you had all these different genres. And then, over time in the 80s, they went from these pure forms of thrash or punk. It really started being mixed. So, and for instance, punk thrash, crossover. You had like bands like Death, which obviously death metal band, but tons of jazz elements, especially in their drumming. So crazy time signature. So like I say, like the 80s, you move from this pure form of thrash, speed, death, whatever, and you get into the late 80s, early 90s, and so forth and so on. These different genres have just mixed and formed this new category of music, which I'm not big on because there's like subgenres out the yin yang that I just sometimes it gives me a headache. So, but what I've really been interested in is music that developed in a particular area of before it spread. And so, what I was gonna do is list my 5 favorite regional metal scenes and punk scenes of all time. And some of these, I didn't get into until later, but I've grown to appreciate the scene, even though I wasn't in that scene originally. I've grown to love it. And so that being said, I'm going to give my 5 favorite regional music scenes. And I'm going to start out with number 5 that really owes everything to this album. Brian Crusher. So this album was released by Earache Records. It's an Earache sampler of bands in '89 that were in their catalog. And it's funny how I got into it. I didn't get into it like I had been getting with tape trading with people in different countries and stuff. And this was back '88, '89, So there was this show. Back in the day, we didn't have cable. So we're talking '88, '89. I actually had to reach out of my bedroom window and turn the antenna. It was the old school antenna. And if you turn it one way, you get Atlanta. I'm in between Atlanta and Greenville. Turn it the exact opposite way, you start picking up, TV stations out of Greenville. And then if you turned it more south, you pick up this one station out of Athens. And I used to watch it every night. And I don't remember the name of the channel, but there was this show that came on Friday nights called 30 Minutes of Rock. And it started out 30 Minutes of Rock, but actually over time grew into 2 hours. It won all kinds of Billboard awards for whatever category they would put that show in. And it lasted only 2 or 3 years. The guy that did it, I can't remember his name, but he went on. He does all kinds of different projects. But man, for young metal guys, and especially in the South, you didn't see metal on TV. You didn't hear metal on your local radio station. You might hear Judas Priest, or I don't even think you heard Iron Maiden. So of course we bought cassettes, and then we did a lot of tape trading back in the day. And so I would actually trade with guys, you know, in other countries. So there was a magazine in the back where you could do some tape trading. You would say, I'm on these, you know, these bands or this genre, and they'll send you some, and you send them some. It was really a great way to get into new music. But the problem is, it took forever. Now, getting back to the story I was telling about the antenna and the TV show, 30 Minutes of Rock. He did occasionally he would do this trivia thing, and it's pretty cool because the guy who hosted 30 Minutes of Rock actually did this trivia at a restaurant in Athens once a week too. I think it's called the Blind Pig Tavern. Anyway, so one night he was doing a basically you had to stump him with a question, so it had to be about metal. And I actually called up, and my question had to do with Metallica and Fleming Rasmussen producing 3 of their albums, or 4. I think the first 4. And sorry, I'm old, so if I get any of this wrong, I apologize. Please correct me in the comments. But anyway, so if he didn't get the answer, if he couldn't guess it or whatever, get it right, you won something. And that night was the Grindcusher sampler on cassette. This is 88, 89, 89. And so I got, you know, I had to wait a few days. That's the bad part of this stuff, man, having to wait forever to get things. It's not like today with the internet where you can go look a band up. I would wait if I hadn't heard a band till it came in the mail. And I was blown away by it. Of course, you know, the sampler's got death metal and it's got bands that aren't from the UK, right? But what I'm going to focus on here with number 5 is really mostly the grindcore scene. And so this sampler got me into Napalm Death, Repulsion. Who else is on here? Bolt Thrower, which some of these bands kind of got thrown in with grind. So it's really, for me, it's like grind / death metal. Bolt Thrower to me is more death metal. They, you know, occasionally would have some blast beats or downturned guitars. I think they really tune their guitars pretty low. Yeah. So not just British bands, but my favorite stuff on here and what I would later get into was the UK British grindcore bands, man. And holy cow, you know, Carcass, this opened up so many doors of bands that I had never known existed, a genre that I didn't know existed, which, Billy, if you go back with the history of grind metal, it kind of started out crust, anarcho punk mixed together. Like, to me, if you listen to Napalm Death, Scum, to me, that's more crust than any kind of metal. Again, though, bands experimented over time. You get the grind label, which normally would mean like growl vocals. Sometimes you have the other vocals, which one's deeper and one's higher. Somebody called it like a Donald Duck vocals. I'm not the biggest fan of those. I'd rather not have the double, but I would rather have the growl. But man, those blast beats and stuff, and you know, blast beats aren't what made grindcore because there were bands doing blast beats, DRI, Cryptic Slaughter, even SOD with Milk. I mean, you know, there was blast beats around, but you take the blast beats, you take the downturned guitars, real fuzzy, you mix extreme, I don't know, thrash, punk, a lot of crust in a lot of these bands, especially early on. And man, I really, really dug it. And so Grindcusher, Earache Records, the UK, man, 80, 89 on. It just, that sampler really turned me on to a lot of bands, not just in the UK, but it really turned me on and I really got into a lot of the grindcore / death metal acts from the UK that I'd never heard of. But thanks to that sampler, man, it opened a door in my mind to just some really, really extreme but great music. Continue to listen to a lot of these bands. Of course, grindcore still exists. I haven't really found a newer type grindcore band that I really get into a lot. But I really think Napalm Death has continued. And of course, are Napalm Death the same band now they were in 85? Heck no, they weren't the same band on their 3rd album they were on the 1st. Think about, you know, Harmony Corruption was more the Florida death metal sound, but it did have blast beats and things. But I think, you know, sometimes we need to learn, you know, just kind of see that, you know, music develops and we get into it, but it's going to change over time. It's not going to stay pure because then it gets boring. So bands are going to mix different elements in their sounds. And of course, most of the grind bands that are still around did. But the UK grind scene I usually start around 85 to 92, 93-ish is my number 5 favorite regional music scene of all time. And I continue to be a big fan of those bands today. And a lot of the bands that aren't from the UK still, Terrorizer and all these other bands. But and what's weird is I can't really get into crust punk, but I like it grind. It's so weird. I don't know why. I'm weird. But anyway, number 5, the UK, 1985 to 1992. It's a grindcore scene / death metal. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon, and I'll do number 4. Take care, everybody. Follow out.